What job should the growth function get done in a company?
So when I think of growth, and it's funny, I actually sort of chose growth as my role at Navattic when I was first joining. I really think it is someone it's kind of sounds so simple, but it's someone who is thinking about how can I take every stage in the sales cycle to the next step. So starting all the way from early on, how can I get people to know about our company, our product? How can we get our name out there? Then to, okay, they've shown some interest. How can I get them to convert? How can I get them into our funnel? And I think when I think about marketing, that's usually where it stops. But what gets me excited about growth is I think there's more opportunity then to say, okay, they're in our sales cycle. How can we make that an easier experience? How can we make sure again, getting them to the next steps, getting them to become happy, healthy customers? And then, yeah, even beyond that, once they're customers, how can we get them to expand usage or maybe, again, get their health score up? So I see it as optimizing just like every single point in that funnel versus sometimes I think people think traditional marketing is just getting people to the website.
That's Natalie. She's the head of growth and product marketing at Navattic. Navattic is a demo automation platform that helps teams accelerate the buyer journey with interactive product demos from first website visit to pre-call discovery and post-call follow-up. She brings fresh eyes to the growth function with just under a decade of experience, spanning roles such as head of growth and operations, marketing director, and even chief of staff. She has a lot to share, and she does share everything throughout this episode, and I really hope you enjoy it and take something away from it. But before we get back to it, run the intro. Welcome to On Growth, a new series from On Marketing to help you think more strategically about growth. I won't tell you what to think, I'll help you improve how you think. I'm Jordan Ogren, a marketing strategist with 9 years of experience and a podcast host for the last 4. This episode was originally recorded on February 26th, 2026. All views shared are the individual views of the host and guests, not those of their employers or associated organizations. This show is for informational purposes, not professional advice. Thank you for being here. So it plays across the funnel or whatever we want to bow tie, whatever we want to say, it kind of plays across that where marketers sometimes just have one. Yeah, when I was talking to Davide, who runs growth at Clay, he kind of had that thought too, that it kind of spans across it. How do you then think about like where does the growth function in, like maybe it doesn't matter where it sits or where it lives, but like how does that fit within the larger maybe go-to-market team or within the kind of teams? How do you see it fitting, or does that not matter at all?
I think it matters for every different org a little differently. For us, it is its own separate function. It's sort of marketing and growth are just combined as one. Like marketing is a subsection almost of growth, but we're all really working together. But I also see it as incredibly collaborative. Like I'm working very closely with my head of CS. I'm working very closely with my head of sales and their teams. So rather than, again, thinking of it more like I feel like growth is maybe more of a team sport versus in the past when you think about marketing or traditional sales funnel, it's more of like a relay race. Versus growth, you're sort of all over the place. You're all over the field helping out everyone else versus just starting off the game or the race.
That's a great metaphor to place it. How do you think about the word, or how do you think about then focusing? Because sometimes where you're more siloed, it's easier, maybe not always, to have focus because you're just making the website smoother or just like you're on one. But how do you ensure that there's focus, or do you sometimes the growth role just plays in this kind of chaos-esque space?
It can play in the chaos, but I do think focus is really important. To your point, especially in growth when there are so many different things you can be doing. And that's where also aligning with the entire leadership team saying, okay, what are our growth area opportunities for this year? And usually for us, that starts out by actually modeling out like, okay, these are the high level numbers that we want to hit at the end of the year. To do that, this is what we need to hit every single quarter. And then you can start playing with different levers, right? Like, okay, let's say if we can increase outbound, is that going to get us X amount more pipeline to get us X amount more revenue? Or actually, do we have a really healthy net new funnel, but maybe we need to focus on upsell? Like that's the biggest growth potential. It really is just sort of mapping out that entire funnel and saying, where are we doing really well? So that's great for growth. Maybe can we like put some more gas on it? And then where it needs our most attention, that's probably where we should be prioritizing the most this quarter to make sure we're not just like spinning our wheels on something that's okay or not the biggest area of opportunity.
A word that comes to my mind that probably fuels some of that is like curiosity, or how do you, like, it seems like a problem solver or like a treasure hunt that you actually enjoy the treasure hunt, and then you might optimize one area, which then just creates a new issue in this other place, which then like you're excited about. How do you stay excited? How do you not? Like, how do you keep kind of staying in that place of exploration and asking questions and trying to figure out like where could we have the greatest impact?
For me personally, it's really actually talking to like our customers, prospects in person. not too surprising, or even like meeting up with the team in person. Because so often the points that are broken in our funnel, or maybe not broken, but need to be improved, if you're talking with customers or prospects, they will bring that up organically. They're not going to tell you like, oh, you have a churn problem, but they might tell you, oh, we're really struggling with X, Y, and Z, and this is why we might not continue, or this is why it's struggling for expansion. Or if you're having a top of funnel problem, if you go meet the prospects you think are your ideal fit in person, and you're like, oh, maybe this isn't a good conversation, or like clearly the value prop isn't resonating, you're going to start suddenly realizing why. And I just think yes, the data really helps to identify like what is the area you need to work on, but the why always comes from talking to people in person. And that's, for me, the exciting part of the treasure hunt, when you figure out like, oh, that's why this isn't working. Like, and again, you really just need those conversations and reps to make that happen.
My mind goes to like a treasure hunt that you have to like talk to people to get more insight for the next place on the treasure hunt. But what gets in the way, and how do you maybe like, what are mistakes when, okay, now I understand, Natalie, that I need to go talk to my customers. What are some mistakes, or what are like techniques or tips you do to ensure that conversation is quote unquote fruitful? I mean, probably every conversation is fruitful regardless, but how do you approach that? And what are some like don'ts or some things that you always do for that?
I actually think the mistake might be feeling like it has to be too structured. Like, I think a lot of people, almost growth people, can sometimes be too data oriented, which data is great. But first of all, again, you might just focus on the data and be like, I don't need to talk to people, I have my results. Or like, oh, I need to put together this very perfect like survey questions, and you might be leading them on, or you might miss kind of interesting, important topics that if you're just casually chatting. So I'm actually a big fan of like, go to conferences, host customer events, meet them in places that isn't just a very professional Zoom setting. Like, I think like a Zoom survey sometimes can feel very transactional, or a Zoom interview. And really also like start by just getting to know them. Like, don't dive in and be like, so what's your biggest problem with our company? That might get them a little off guard, but just understand more about their day to day. What are they struggling with? What are they going through? What are they thinking about? And usually that opens up to a pretty organic question. And just stay curious. Like, if you hear something, ask them to elaborate. They might think it's obvious, but that might be a really good insight for you. So just like, I don't know, if you were talking to a friend and they were telling you they're having a bad day, you're probably not just gonna be like, that's cool, hope it gets better. Hopefully not. Like, you're gonna ask follow-up questions, figure out why. And I think you can just treat your customers or talk to them as if you are just generally trying to figure out how they're doing.
I really like that. I've read a bit into the Jobs to be Done framework with Bob Moiston. He talks about kind of this like a documentary-esque approach to the interviews, where you, to your point, it's very open-ended, and then sometimes when you get to that point where they're like, this was a point I changed or I switched, you kind of drill deep into that moment of like, okay, but give me the whole picture of that day. Like, was it raining out? Did you drop the kids out? Like, because some of those small things, so you almost are starting to be, and that's like curious. I think it obviously pushes that, but also just the naturalness or not making it feel, so then they're able to just share things, like creating the conditions for that data points to come out of that person. And sometimes, and most times, it's very naturally, or just going to a bunch of different places where they're already at, which you talked about. That's a really smart place to start. How do you, it seems like it's a dance, at least from my own experiences, but how do you then take all of those different qualitative points and then start to leverage that with the quantitative to build some sort of takeaway insight? Talk to me at all about that. It seems like it's a dance. Sometimes it just comes together as you're going along, but talk to me about that in your experiences.
Yeah, I will say it definitely is tough, because if you're doing in-person conversations and you can't always be recording it, that's a little hard. So you can't necessarily have your phone out right there. I do try to just like jot down notes, or I'll actually share with my team. So if I go to a conference, usually at the end of the day, or let's say at the end of the conference, I'll send a note to other members of leadership and be like, hey, here are some interesting things I heard. I might not get the exact quote. I mean, again, it would be a little hard if you're just casually having a conversation to record it, but just making sure I'm recording some of those notes. Sometimes I even like right after a conversation, pull up my phone and just jot something down really quickly. And then I share that with team leads, and then I can go back and compare it again against the points in the funnel that we're having trouble with, or specific initiatives, and say like, okay, this maybe gives an answer to why we're seeing pain points here. I'll also go try to validate it with other members of the team, most often sales and customer success, and be like, is this things that you're also hearing from prospects and customers? Is this just a one-off thing? Should I be concerned? And a lot of times it is matching what they're hearing. And that's pretty good data in itself to say, like, okay, multiple members, different departments have been hearing the same feedback from prospects and customers.
That makes a lot of sense. Sometimes the conversations aren't recordable, so you kind of maybe have an end of the day at a conference, or at the end of a week, you kind of share all of those insights with the team just to put it out there to then have like a source of truth or something that you can keep coming back of, like, this was some takeaways. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And then bringing it to internally to like validate or to see, like, maybe it points to something else, but at least it gets us the conversation started with sales, customer success. That makes a lot of sense. What, Natalie, is a skill or something you think if someone wanted to be better in a growth function, or maybe they're a marketer and they're just like, I think what you're talking about makes a lot of sense in my small business of kind of playing bigger. What's a skill or something you would recommend these individuals gain, improve, enhance? Is there anything that comes to your mind that's like critical for the growth position, that this skill, maybe it's a competence, maybe it's a way they do their work? Does anything come to your mind, Natalie, for that?
I'm going to cheat because I have a few things that come to mind. So it's not just one. I think number one, really understanding other departments. And I guess the skill is just like empathy for your coworkers. You don't necessarily have to do it, but a good example is I think a lot of teams are really struggling to communicate with sales. And when you're in growth, even if you're more PLG led, you probably have some sort of sales function going on. I always think sales is like your best source of information. They're talking to prospects day in, day out. And a lot of times people just don't understand maybe like what's the most important to sales, how to communicate them, how to use their language, or like they try to book time and they're like, oh, they're always so busy, but maybe you're reaching out to them at their end of quarter, which is a terrible time to bother the sales team. So just like asking them, again, same with your customers, ask them a little more about their day-to-day, what they care about, what they focus on. And then when giving updates or communicating them, keep those things in mind. I really think with growth in particular, you have to be able to work cross-functionally. So that's my number one. For number two, and then I'll stop at that. I'll just do two.
No,
I've narrowed it down.
Keep it going.
I think two is I've always thought about people I know who are really good at growth, to your point, kind of like really like solving puzzles. They really like finding common patterns, but also when to break them. It's like you have to identify why something is happening. I think about this all the time with like SEO. That's where my background came from. I think that's very growth, channel. And so much of SEO is you're identifying patterns. Why is this ranking and why is this not? And a lot of times, yes, Google gives you its outlines, but for every individual keyword, it might have to do more with like the search intent. It might have to do with this particular keyword does better with video content than like written content. I do think you have to kind of go in and investigate. But then you also need to break it, because if you just write the same article everyone else does, that's probably not going to rank and also just not impress your audience. So you're like, how can I keep the pattern that's important, but then also break it so that we stand out?
I love it. And I think that's probably an art and a skill that you grow over time, but super important in the growth role. And I like that you answered with two. Awesome. So Natalie, that was fun. I could probably keep going on, but I'm ready to switch into maybe the more important topic of life. Are you ready for that?
Let's do it.
So in your own view, Natalie, what is the job of life? Or when you're done with life, you're on your deathbed and you look back, how do you define that as a life well lived?
Wow, that's a heavy question, but I think I have an answer for it. I think for me personally, I just think about it as like the close relationships I have. Did I help make that person a little bit better or make their day-to-day a little bit better? Like did I just put out more happiness and good into the world than maybe negativity or selfishness, which sounds very lofty maybe, but it's as simple as just like, did I make my family and friends smile on a day-to-day basis?
So those in your orbit or around your orbit, have I positively influenced or impacted their lives? Which then my mind goes to like service. Like you're kind of, the idea of life is to be of service to another versus the alternative is to just want to be served. Were you always that way, Natalie, from a young kind of kid, or was this kind of a worldview that you've started to grow? Did you have parents that gave you a model that is an important North Star for life?
I was going to say, I would love to say that this is something I just had since birth, but I have to give so much credit to my parents here. My mom was a kindergarten teacher most of her life. So growing up, she always made me think about, how are the other person feeling in the situation? Like maybe they acted this way, but have you thought about why? Like she's just so good with emotions and intent, and she didn't really just let me get away with like, oh, this person was mean to me today, they suck. She's like, no, let's talk through why. I understand that's a frustrating emotion, but just always made me have empathy for the other person. And then my dad, and they both really believe in community values service. But I think that was something also my dad really emphasized. Like when we were young, he would take us to, like if his company was doing a community day, he would bring us or just talk about, make sure to highlight the things that we were very lucky for. And just both, I'm very lucky too. I have big families on both sides. I have a big Italian family on my dad's side, my mom's side, classic like Jersey closeness. And I think that just really made my emphasis on family, because I was very lucky to see like very close, big families and how much it meant to have each other.
Well, I think your point's valid. There's a whole large conversation on like, what is a child born with good in their heart? Is a child born like as a Christian, this thought of like sin? But I think one thing that I take away from conversations is like the child doesn't just instantly understand I'm supposed to serve others, or this is what volunteering. I've heard so many people with philanthropy talk about how it starts very early and you have to model that to a child, because it doesn't maybe come intuitively of like, yeah, I'm going to give a coat to someone else when I have two coats because I can only wear one. And then I use that obviously because of Jesus's kind of thing of like, if someone has no coats, give them all of yours. And it's very counterintuitive. So we need that model to be like, oh, and then we do it enough. And at least I found there's a lot of self-positive feelings you feel when you help others. How have you then taken your model of your parents, and then at some point you kind of had to make it your own, or like you just have like, how do you focus on service, and what does that look like in your life versus how do you not maybe focus on Natalie as the center of the world, which is my own personal challenge of like, it's not all about Jordan. Is there things you do, mental models, any practices that help you be more of a service mindset than being served, or it's all about me?
Yeah, I'm going to cheat again and have a few answers for this. I think first in like a professional setting, which is maybe where we wouldn't usually think about this, what really actually solidified this idea for me was I remember after I left my last role, and I was very hardworking, always, trying to help everyone out, get ahead. Like I really thought when I left, I would be remembered for like the impact I made as far as the business. And I was getting very nice messages when I left. And a lot of times it was like, thank you so much for the positivity or the positive attitude you brought or the smile you bring into calls. And there were definitely days where I was maybe not feeling positive on the inside. But that really just hit of like, it does make an impact. The people you are working with, even if you are having a terrible day, sometimes if you can help someone out, like you don't know how much that could impact them. And at the end of the day, like, I was so much happier to be leaving knowing that that's why people were excited to work with me than if they were like, oh, thanks for growing pipeline by X amount. Like, that's great too. I also want to be growing pipeline, but like that was just such a revelation of, oh, right. Like even if you're having the worst day, and trust me, like there are days you're not going to be your best self. This is not something you can do every single day, but even if I am still trying to bring positivity and a smile. So that was on the professional side. On the personal side, I think it was your point too of like, it's so easy to just caught up in your own life and it doesn't feel good. Like every single time that I go do an active service, like every week I go, when I'm in New York, I go and help out, hand out food to those who are living on the streets or just need a meal. And every Friday it's like after work and I'm just like, oh, I'm tired. I don't want to do this. I'm on the subway. I'm like, I'm going to fall asleep. I can't do it. And I always feel better after. And I think that like, it's not surprising that we feel better by helping other people, but it also just like helps me get out of my own bubble too. I'm even when you're volunteering, it's not like you're volunteering with the same people you're hanging out with or working with every day. And it just gives you a bigger picture of life. You're like, oh, right. Like the thing I was annoyed about at work really is not that important compared to all this other stuff going on.
Yeah, I've heard, I like your acts of service. I've heard there's like this mental model where, yeah, when you put your focus and your love towards someone, like you just automatically kind of have that rising of your emotion, your feelings. I was let go 4 years ago and I knew someone was in our church moving that day, but because I was supposed to be working, I didn't sign up for it. But then instantly I knew, okay, I can either go home, I can go to the bar, I can kind of sulk in my sadness, or I can go and serve someone and I know I will feel better after doing that. So it was like a selfless move that I did. And I think as I start to like become aware of how great the feelings is, it's like almost every selfless thing I do has some piece of selfishness that I know it's going to make me feel better. And I know, to your point, I'm going to have a wider perspective of life. I'm going to realize my problems on getting a job aren't that bad when someone maybe has a felony, which then it's making it even harder to get them a job. And then I have that conversation. I'm like, whoa, okay, my cards aren't that bad now. So you gain something almost every time from it. But then you also like are helping people. So it's like, it's a double positive. And I love your point of like, I haven't thankfully had a ton of moments where I built something or I've had a tower. But that feeling of like trying to get people to be like, look at how cool my tower is, look at my tower, versus just like joining another's building of a tower and helping them, just always, I don't know, I would rather point to 50 towers, I put 2 bricks on each, a very small, than to have everybody looking like, look at how big my tower is, please tell me how great I am. So I do feel that there's like that negative or ucky feeling, and maybe once you start serving, it becomes even more prominent when you focus on yourself. You're like, I don't like that, I'd rather be serving others.
It's also just we're so isolated these days, and service is just usually a forced way to go out and meet new people and talk to people. And I think that also really helps. And then to your point of like, yes, maybe it's selfish and that's making me feel better, but if I'm in a better mood, then when I show up to work the next day, I'm probably going to be in a better mood. Again, I'm going to pass on that positivity a little more. And I think we have to remind ourselves, like, it's okay if we are being selfish for the point of making ourselves, I don't even want to say selfish, but if we're focusing on ourselves to the point of making ourselves overall a happier, healthy person, that will pass on. But if we're being self-obsessed just for the sake of like, for ego, or I even think sometimes when I'm having a really bad day, I'm being very self-obsessed. Like if I'm just like, oh, everything sucks and the world is so against me, that's still a form of like kind of selfishness and self-obsession. Then I'm probably, again, putting negativity more into the world.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah, I find there's a spectrum of like pride, ego, and then like self-pity, and they're both all still focused. Even when I fall into self-pity, you can trick yourself of like, but it's still about me, of how bad my situation is. Yeah, and in that service, I like your point of the community aspect, or ways that service brings us into community. And I find so much with technology and maybe with us young people, like we avoid that, but like throughout history, people have only been able to grow in community because you have to deal with that person who just tells really long stories, and you find grace with them. And like, you can't do that on the mountain in like the monk cave. You have to kind of come back down to civilization. So I do find service is a great way. If you're struggling of like, I don't find connection or I'm isolated, it's a great way, because like everyone needs more volunteers. Like everyone will welcome you with open arms if you're willing to go to that soup kitchen or help there. And then you get the positive benefit of being in community, which I think is critical for humans, has been in history. And I think we're, with AI and all that, it's probably only increasing our need for people to come together.
Exactly.
You talked about how your past team members reached out to you and had different messages, which were kind of how you got to this point of like, wow, it wasn't the pipeline growth that I did, it was my positivity, some of those things. I talk to a lot of people about that concept of like going to your friends and using jobs to be done to be like, if I know you're not hiring me, but if you were to hire me, what would you hire me for? And so many times that answer is never, you help grow my sales. If it's someone you're working with, it's like, you bring peace to the chaos in these moments, or your smile, or some of those things. How have you deployed that in other areas? Do you frequently kind of seek feedback in ways because like it shows you more and more what truly matters to others, versus in our own heads we can conflate what our impact or our value, or do you just now have a very clear understanding from that experience of like, this is what Natalie brings to the table in the sense of positivity, a great smile, all those things?
I don't know if I've directly asked my friends for feedback, and now I'm like, oh, should I?
No, you're not crazy like me. That's good. No.
I'm pretty lucky where I have a very close group of friends that I've been friends with for a while, and if I'm doing something that's annoying them, they'll call me out. Or even like, I know I last year went through a bout of like a lot of negativity. I was being very self-indulgent, and I just called myself out on it. And they're like, yeah, you were. It's time to be a little more positive. And obviously then they talk through it and like, are you good? Do we need some help? But I try to just be a little self-aware and check with them. But it's funny because that idea of like, oh, I wanted to be the positive one, I probably also had that a lot with my friend group growing up. Like, classic Northeast, very stressed. Everyone was so worried about like colleges and grades and all that. So I would always just take on the like, oh, I don't care, I'll be the funny one or the goofy one, or I'll tell a joke. Like, I just never took myself too seriously because they were all taking themselves so seriously that I was like, oh, we can't all do this. That we're all just going to be stressed. So I'm actually, as I'm saying, I first got that idea of positivity from work. I actually probably got it when I was a lot younger and brought that into work, of just realizing like in a very stressed environment, a lot of times someone who is being positive or a little smiley. And again, there are plenty of times I don't do it. There are plenty of times I am the one bringing stress. I am chaotic. Like, I don't want to pretend that, you know, at every single decision or at work, I'm happy every single day. But it just was a good reminder of like, even if in the moment no one says something, it does add up in the long run.
Yeah, that importance of a inner circle, a table or advisors to be able, to your point, to call you out on stuff is so important. So I love that. All right, final question here. Have you ever watched the movie Inception? This question's based off of that movie.
I have, but not in a while, so we'll see if I remember it.
Perfect. Quick spark note on it. These individuals go into people's dreams. They incept ideas, usually nefarious, so then the next day they sell their company to this person or give shares up. I'm going to ask you the question, but more in a benevolent sense. If you could go in the minds of every human and incept an idea, so tomorrow we wake up and your idea you incept, we live out of as our own idea, what idea do you go in the minds of every human and incept? So tomorrow we wake up and Natalie's idea is what we're living out of. What idea do you choose to incept? I know, huge powers.
I was going to say, that is so much power. That is so scary. I'm going to keep it on the theme of what we were just talking about. Just like, go do something nice today. Because I wish sometimes people incepted that in my brain on days that I'm feeling very negative or waking up in a bad mood. And I think, for some people, like, it is much harder for them to volunteer time or service. They have a lot going on in their own lives. Maybe they did not grow up with great parents who modeled the way. So I don't want to say, like, everyone needs to go out and go necessarily, like, volunteer 100 hours or go be the perfect person. But that's why I like the goal of, like, did I just make my immediate friends and family happier by my presence? I think that's something that we can all generally achieve.
Yeah, I think that is a bite that we could probably swallow today. So I appreciate that one. And yeah, I think the world would be a lot better if we all found just those small moments to serve another or to be there. I love that idea. Well, thank you, Natalie, so much for coming on and sharing your wisdom in your humanness. I really enjoyed this conversation, so thank you.
Thank you so much for having me.
And this is the end of the podcast. What one idea or topic of conversation stood out to you today? Write it down, share it with a friend, post it on social. The main thing is take action. That's how we go from theory to mastery. We need to practice. We need to put it into practice. Thank you for listening and being here, and I hope you tune in next week.